Let's start here now. President Cyril Ramaphosa has signed a proclamation authorizing the Special Investigating Unit to probe allegations of maladministration and corruption in the Tshwane Metro Rooiwal Wastewater treatment project. The SIU says it has its eye on the procurement and contracting for construction of the Phase 1 upgrades and refurbishments of the Rooiwal wastewater treatment works. Now, earlier this year, the Tshwane government announced that it would be investing 450 million rands over the next 3 years towards the refurbishment of that treatment plant. For more on this, let's talk now to SIU's Kaizer Kganyago. Kganyago, good to have you, and thank you very much for coming on tonight here on In Focus. According to Action SA, it seems you are maybe acting a couple of months later. According to their liking, they would have given you the outcomes of their, what do you call, inquiry, which they conducted with the South African Human Rights, and they had asked you to investigate. They're not sure why you have not investigated, but they're also saying they gave you some 4 cases of companies that were complaining to look at. This was around 2022 already.
Thank you very much. Even though you are getting faint, I don't know what the situation is, but I've heard what you're saying, and it's very problematic that now that we've got a proclamation, we then get information or some accusations like that. It is not something that we want to hear, but the reality of the matter is we do not investigate on the basis of information just being brought to us. When information is brought to our attention, we then look into it, we check whether it works with our mandate. We are in a position to then deal with the issues and be in a position to convince ourselves that it works with our mandate. But secondly, we look into the issue of checking whether there is something to investigate. And all of those things we have ticked as the organization, and we then start the process of the proclamation, which then gets sent to the President via the Department of Justice and ultimately come to here. Therefore, I don't think it is time at the moment for such accusations.
So, I mean, what would make a word deficient, for lack of a better word? For example, if a contractor would have let me say, a contractor says, I'm a joint venture, but it turns out that the joint venture is actually 2 companies that are owned by 1 person. Would that be sufficient to make the tender deficient?
It depends on what the spec of the tender was, because it is very important that we then go into the bottom of it. But the allegations that is before us is the fact that this tender was not done in a proper way. Therefore, what we are now going to look at is to see what was the advert of the tender saying. The people that are there, do they meet the specifications of the tender that were awarded this, and did they do the work that they are supposed to do? Because you might meet the specification of the tender, but not do what you are supposed to do. And therefore, in that way, it means you have been paid for work that has not been done. Therefore, when we get into this investigation, we will look into all of those dynamics. And then once we find that there is some irregularity that happened, then we'll be in a position to then pronounce very clearly what we have found, but also say these are the next steps that we are going to take in dealing with this contract.
So in your experience, I mean, in this particular field of work, for example, we know for sure when you were investigating the protective gear during the COVID-19 instance, where a company that had no experience in providing protective gear, in fact, it was a car wash, I think it was registered as a car wash, but seemed to have won the tender. That certainly raised red flags for you. So the inquiry that was done, even the forensic that apparently was done by the city of Tshwane, seems to indicate that the contractor was lacking some kind of competence as far as this work that was supposed to have been done. Not only that, it lacked even money to commence the work. So almost the city had to give them an advance for site establishment and things like that. Would that certainly raise red flags for you of irregularities?
No, definitely it will. And we hope that when we start to investigate, we will then be in a position to verify all that, because we do not want to take things at face value. and we do not want to preempt what the investigation is going to find. Because at the end of it all, the whole thing starts with when the spec is put in place. What does the spec say? Because as far as I know, government is not allowed to do prepayment unless it was arranged in the spec or whatever the case might be. But we are not allowed to do that. Therefore, those are the things that we will find. And we do not, as the SIU, want to immediately say so-and-so is right, so-and-so is wrong. People might have done their investigations. Now, all of those investigations will be before us. We'll be having all our full powers to call on people that we want to call on and quiz them. And they will be able to answer all of these questions that you are asking now, so that we are able to then say, at the end, we've come to a conclusion based on facts, not based on rumors.
Yeah. Does the fact that this tender was cancelled have any bearing, I suppose, on your own investigations? Because I suppose one of the things that you would do yourselves as the SIU is look at the tender and say, this tender is irregular, it must be cancelled. But if the tender has already been cancelled, how does that impact on your work?
It will not, because cancelling the tender is one part. When we find that the tender was not entered into, or the contract was not entered into in a fair manner, we don't only cancel it, but we set it aside, which means it does not exist. Therefore, it gives us an opportunity to then go back and say, what then happens to the money that was already paid? Because that is what the issue is. And if you look at the proclamation, they always say, we've got to make sure that all the monies that have been lost to the state has to be recovered.
Yeah, and this is, of course, a case that is unique in a sense that when the tender was cancelled, the so-called joint venture then went to court. And by a court order, a case being that the city of Tshwane did not challenge that particular court order, is that they were then awarded, I think they say, an amount of 71 million rands for the work that they had already done and put in place. How is that going to complicate your work?
At the moment, I wouldn't know how it will complicate our work, but at the end of it all, if we find at any stage that there was money that was paid and that was irregular, that's why the emphasis with us dealing with these matters in the tribunal is to say you set aside. When you set aside a contract, you then go to the beginning of the contract and say, now this contract does not exist, and therefore if it doesn't exist, all of the transactions that would have happened after will have to be irregular.
And then the other issue, of course, from experience of how you deal with these particular matters, if there is transgression by officials, in some instances you recommend that the municipality or the department would take action on those particular officials. The city of Johannesburg Mayor Cyril Ramaphosa already saying their own forensic investigation seems to point to irregularity in this tender, and disciplinary steps are already underway. And I suppose that would mean you yourselves are not going to make those recommendations again if disciplinary steps are already underway.
Yes, it doesn't necessarily mean we are not going to, because then our investigation has to give all of that. Therefore, if we then go back to them and say, these are the people that we found to have done wrong, they are still with the municipality, and we think you need to discipline them, they will then have to write back to us and say, 1, 2, or 3, we've already started with the disciplinary action. 4, 5, 6, we did not know about, we will deal with them at that point. Therefore, we still have to do that recommendation, because it is very important for the record that after our investigation, we have come up with these people who needs to be disciplined.
Now, of course, the Tshwane Metro has already responded to the proclamation. Here's what Mayor Cyril Ramaphosa had to say to that question.
We welcome the decision to declare an SIU investigation into the 2020 tender to upgrade the Rooiwal wastewater treatment plant. According to the city's own forensic investigation, the tender was irregularly awarded. It also failed before the work could be completed. The SIU investigation will make it more difficult to hold individuals responsible for tender irregularities to account and potentially to recover some money. The city has, of course, already taken the steps necessary to blacklist those companies that have been involved with the tender so that they don't do business with government in future at all.
I suppose you take that as an indication by the mayor that they will be cooperating with your processes. And I mean, if the South African Human Rights Commission inquiry already had access to the tender documents, or at least Action SA via their PIA applications, it shouldn't be a problem for the SIU to get a hold of those tender documents.
We hope so, but with our experience, Thabo, we know that in some instances there will be some of the individuals who would not want to cooperate, and therefore we will use our full powers to do that. And then I like what the mayor is saying, because what is important with our investigation, unlike all the other investigations that might have happened, we have got the power to go and recover the money in our own name or in the name of the city of Tshwane.
Kaizer Kganyago, appreciate your time. Thank you very much for joining us. That is the spokesperson for the SIU there, Kaizer Kganyago, following the proclamation by the president to investigate what is happening in the Tshwane Rooiwal water treatment project and what actually took place as far as the awarding of that contract.